Jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge was not something that John Kevin Hines wanted to do. Amidst the tears as he rode the bus to the jump point, he decided that if anyone at all, asked him what was wrong, he wouldn't jump. He got to the bridge, and after being asked by a tourist to take a photograph, he rushed the railing of the bridge and threw himself off. We know what he was thinking that day because by some miracle, he managed to survive the 20-story drop. It seems odd that John thought that things were so bad that he was willing to commit suicide, and yet, if one person would reach out to him, he would be willing to call it off and to go on living. Why could that one person make such a difference?
By the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired. It's why we're here.
Brene Brown's work is fascinating and, in its own way, beautiful. She paints a portrait of people yearning for connection, wounded by broken relationships, and enlivened by a sense of love and belonging. The question that I want to tackle in this talk is, how does Brene Brown's scientific research mesh with the Christian faith? There is good money to be made in promoting the war between science and religion. Books get sold, controversy always helps the TV ratings, and if you're running for political office, depending on which side of the issues that you land on, you can secure either the anti-heathen vote or the anti-Neanderthal vote. But in ye olden days, those who studied the physical sciences and those who studied philosophy and theology didn't seem to have the same sort of contentious relationship. Sometimes the scientist, the philosopher, and the theologian were all the same guy, like St. Albert the Great. He was so smart, he was believed in his own day to have amassed all the knowledge available in the world, everything, from biology to scripture. Every field of study has its own expertise regarding a certain part of life. So when Brown says that we're built for connection, I believe her. Interviews and statistics collected over almost a decade of research point to all the problems that arise when we don't have connection, and all the good things follow in its wake when it is there. But there are two sets of questions that she doesn't answer and can't answer from her research. And this is where philosophy and theology come in. The first set of questions is of this sort. What kind of connection do we ultimately want? And what does it take to fill that void? What is enough? The second set of questions are the why questions. Why are we made for connection? Why does the very core of ourselves contain a void that must be filled if we're going to be happy? I think a good way of finding out what it is we're ultimately hungry for is to look at all the things that leave us unsatisfied. Now, one common way to pursue happiness is to go down the materialistic road.
We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in U.S. history. The problem is, and I learned this from the research, that you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin.
We can't numb our emotions, or I would say, satisfy our deepest hungers with material things. If we think about our happiest memories, they probably involve other people. A couple of beers and a banana nut muffin might be included, but they aren't the center of attention. It's the relationship with others that counts. But there's a problem here, because every connection that we do experience has its limitations. In this life, we constantly encounter changeable, perishable people. But if this world is all there is, then every relationship must die completely in the end. And even apart from death, people move away, friendships slowly fade, conflicts arise. It's hard to love something totally when you can see the day off in the horizon, when it just won't be there anymore. When I was a freshman in college, I became friends with a guy named Kyle. Great guy. One of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life. terrible driver. By the time I had met him, he had managed to total several cars and a few more bicycles. I was occasionally going to daily mass at that point, and being a good Catholic, I of course sat in the back of church close to the exit. One day he walked in late to mass and sat down right next to me. He looked disheveled, his shirt was torn, he was bleeding in a couple of places, and it turns out that he was late for mass and had borrowed someone's bike and was pedaling so quickly that the front wheel had flown off and he crashed, naturally. Terrible driver. And it was always odd walking next to him down the sidewalk because he couldn't even manage to walk the bike in a straight line. And as our friendship deepened, so did this little feeling inside of me that someday I would be getting a call saying that he had died in a fatal car accident. Well, I did get that call the Monday after spring break of that year, and I found out that Kyle had died the day before from a brain aneurysm, totally unrelated to anything driving related. To this day, I still think about him and miss him. The real problem here is that everyone we know dies, and we're faced with a rather tough question. Can we ever be truly happy? The British author G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Man cannot love mortal things. He can only love immortal things for an instant." Part of the beauty of falling in love is that our perception of the relationship is that it's undying, but that isn't the truth, at least not from a purely biological perspective. A couple of years ago, Coca-Cola produced a commercial that illustrated this problem in fantastic detail.
We were 6 weeks from graduation, the 5 of us.
This commercial shows us how every great party,
Ears ringing,
every deep conversation,
voices all screamed out. We rode home from the concert, in the car with no air.
every moment of silent connection begs for eternity. And not just for eternity,
And as I watched them sleep, it hit me.
but for infinite bliss.
It was the best night of my life. And I kind of wished we could all stay on that train forever.
And here we see the sorrow creep in, because every day, even the very best of days, comes to an end with us saying, I kind of wished we could all stay on that train forever. But where does that leave us? If even the greatest of days, with the best of friends, leaves us longing for something more, what can possibly satisfy us? St. Augustine was a philosopher, theologian, playboy, and bishop. Not all at the same time, of course. And he famously said, "We were made for you, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." It was a connection so important to Augustine that he was willing to give up his wild ways in order to pursue that love. A deep connection or love with other human beings offers us a glimpse of that happiness, but it can't satiate us. One person is not enough. People in healthy marriages have friends outside of marriage. And believe it or not, my 592 Facebook friends also aren't enough. Brown ends her first TED Talk with the advice to
let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. To love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. And I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult.
To love and be loved. That's it. That's what it's all about. If we aren't seen, then we can't be loved. If we don't see the goodness in something, then we can't love it. We want to love with our whole hearts, but that means we've got to find something good enough to be worthy of everything that we have to give. What we ultimately want is to possess everything. Every beautiful song, every ounce of pleasure, every bit of joy, until even goodness itself is totally ours forever. Now, science operates on the assumption that every effect has a proportionate cause. Our infinite desires need an explanation. And this all makes sense if St. Augustine is right. If we were made for you, O Lord. When God speaks to Moses in the Old Testament, he reveals his name, I am. the very same name that Jesus applies to himself. God is the one who is truth and goodness, and in seeing him, knowing him, our thirst can finally be quenched. And this is the answer to the first set of questions about what can satisfy us. It also conveniently points to why we are the way we are, why we have this desire for the infinite. It's because we are made by someone who is himself infinitely good and loving. And if God didn't want to satisfy that hunger in our hearts, why would he create it in the first place? If we didn't have that desire, though, what could possibly open us up to the reality of God and make us seek him? We are hungry for love, basically, because we are made by love and for love. Standing in the way of wholehearted living, though, are the problems of guilt and shame. How can we overcome these?